All right. Thank you for joining, everyone. My name is Shay, and I'm with Insight Lime Analytics. And our moderators here today, having a pretty casual conversation about a really unique topic, though, are MaryBeth and Daniel. So I will let them kind of kick us off here and introduce themselves. But thank you all for joining. And I did just want to let everyone know you can use the chat feature to ask any questions. There's also a questions button. But feel free to put any comments, questions. If you'd like to introduce yourselves and tell us where you're listening in from today, that would be awesome. But I'll let you guys kick it off from here.
Great. Hi, guys. I'm Daniel. I also usually go by DB, and I am a co-founder and CEO of a company called Orita. And my co-founder and I are both machine learning engineers, and what we do is we're basically janitors for data. So what that means is that we take a D2C brand's data from marketing platforms like Klaviyo or their e-commerce platform like Shopify, all the sorts of different data streams that they have. We then clean every single piece of customer data that comes in and then use a combination of graph theory and machine learning to link and unify it all together. That way, at the end of the day, brand can be like, oh, these 3 accounts in Shopify, these 2 accounts in Klaviyo, and this 1 account in Zendesk are all actually the same person, and they get that 360 view of the customer with an accurate transaction history. I'm sure MaryBeth and I will get into a lot of the consequences of what happens when you start cleaning up your data and have high quality customer data, but that in a nutshell is what we do.
Great, and that's a great intro from DB. My name is MaryBeth Maskovas. Sometimes people also call me MB. And I'm the principal analytics consultant and founder of a consulting firm called Insight Lime. We're focused on kind of the other piece of the equation of that, which is how to use data most effectively, regardless to the size of a company. And we do that with data strategy consulting and also more digital analytics work, very focused on the analysis side of things versus being an implementation firm. We go in and we see where people are at with their current data, what is usable right now, what's usable with only a little bit of investment, and turning that into business decisions as quickly as possible for companies. And we also focus on consumer insights with the same philosophy in mind, that we're looking at what you can get for what's appropriate for your size of company and looking at what's most customer-centric way as well, right? Like we want to make sure that we're focusing on what makes a difference for the customers, which in turn makes a difference for you.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to give a little bit of background. So MaryBeth and I both met at Shop Talk, and we kind of really connected right away with a sort of similar philosophy of trying to get the most value and the most bang for your buck when it comes to data strategy, and becoming a data-driven organization. And so, as we said, as she alluded to, we're on kind of opposite sides of the coin, but it actually works very closely together. I would say right off the bat, before we dive into the details, where our philosophies align is like, we believe that if you have really, really good data and you have a really, really good, smart plan on answering some high value business questions with data, you can actually take a relatively straightforward approach as long as you have good data, and then you'll have something that's really impactful right away. And that is a little bit against the current of a lot of what we see, where there's lots of like super fancy tools or a lot of reporting things that don't actually make a difference in terms of the strategy that you'll have. And we actually want to take a step back and make things simpler.
Yeah, I really appreciated that approach and immediately hit it off. And I remember you saying that you were also a consultant first and then saw this opportunity, and I just really liked that, and I saw that there was a huge opportunity. When we're talking about AI, there's a lot of hype around it, right? Like there's so many sexy things going on. Everyone's trying to figure out how to use it, and I'd love it if you just talked a little bit more about how it's like one of the, I think, most effective applications I can see of AI is data cleansing.
Yeah, so the way that this started, so my co-founder and I were both similar to MaryBeth. We were both data science, data analytics consultants, kind of just like seeing how we can help companies become data-driven right off the bat. And we did all sorts of different types of projects, from helping people do pricing to logistics, to customer analysis and stuff like that. And, no matter what your overall data strategy is, it's really a 3-step process, and that's collecting the data. Well, this is after you've defined whatever it is that you're trying to go. Okay, so that's number one. But then after that, it's collecting the data, making sure it's any good and unifying and cleaning it, and then acting upon it. And sometimes acting upon it is simply reporting on it. Sometimes it's feeding it to Klaviyo to make segmentations and make something like that, or a product recommendation engine. Lots and lots of different ways in which you do it. But those first two steps are really key. And what Zach and I noticed is that there's actually really not that much out there in terms of that second critical step. And so lots and lots of companies have options to pump data into places. They might use Fivetran, they might do it themselves. Then they have lots and lots of tools that will allow them to act on the data or to report on it. But there are very, very few tools out there that actually make sure that your data is connected and high quality in the first place. And so it's usually left up to teams, and you have to have like, an identity resolution expert, all this sort of stuff. And so we just thought that there was an opportunity after doing this like 12 times in a row that maybe we should try and make this a standalone product, and therefore make it easier for people like you, MaryBeth. It's like, okay, I want to actually deliver the value, but I don't want to spend 80% of my time up front cleaning it in the first place. So that's the perfect reason for why we started it. And the reason why it requires AI or machine learning is because it's actually like an incredibly difficult problem. A lot of platforms out there have very strong assumptions on what makes up an individual person. For example, in Shopify, it's, I have not seen this exact email address before, but I can make an email alias address. I can use my personal email. I can use my work email. They all represent me as a person. And in fact, how we represent ourselves digitally is quite complicated, and it changes over time. As you graduate from college, you have a different email address and all these sorts of things. You change your last name, you change your gender, you can change almost everything about you over time. And so companies are kind of left scrambling as this kind of mass of information that represents a person in real life evolves. And so what we do is we take basically a three-step process where the first thing that we do is we clean up all the information. Is this a real address? Is this a real email address? Is this a real phone number? And then we have these machine learning models that go, okay, we see this preponderance of evidence that these two accounts are actually the same person. Let's link them together. And that's a really, really tricky part. That's a very hard computer science problem. And so that's why we don't think that people need to have someone in-house to do it every single time.
Yeah, that's really key. And I guess I have a question, which is like, why is having a unified customer record so important?
Yeah, there's a lot of very, very basic things. So one of the ways that I think about this is kind of like, which information is the most valuable about your customers? And for every brand, it's really their sales and their transactions, right? So when did someone buy? Who did they buy it for? What did they buy when? And what's really shocking is that because a lot of assumptions in which these platforms work, even that sort of basic history is really off. So at a very, very top level, your basic metrics like how many customers do you actually have? What is their lifetime value? What is your repeat purchase rate? All of those things can be wrong off the bat. We typically see things like in the 10 to 15% range for a lot of brands. So, it's a little bit of a bomb going off when we enter and we're just like, hey, you don't have 100,000 customers, you have 85,000, but they're worth more, they cost more to acquire. There's so many different reasons why having that unified history and accurate history is so important. And those are some of the top ones.
So it really helps you get a more accurate picture of where you're really at, so you can make better business decisions and understand where you're at with maybe some things that like lifetime value is such a big thing for a lot of D2C e-commerce brands. And if you've been assuming it's X where it's really Y because and it's actually higher, and you've been having pressure from like your board of directors or board of advisors, that can really be something key to and potentially worthwhile to pinpoint and get right.
Yeah, that's right. And that's from the top level too. And if you actually think about it across all your customers, what this usually means is that you have a bunch of customers that look like they've purchased from you once or twice, so they churned really quickly. And that might actually be a reflection of a very, very good customer who's forgotten that they've used this email before, or they're taking advantage of a first-time promo and stuff like that. So it's not just like the average that's different, but it's like the whole distribution of the behavior of your customers. And so a lot of times when brands run through us, they go, oh, like we don't have as much churn as we thought we did, or something like that, or like, oh, this product or this channel that is our best for acquiring prospects is like not really true. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Oh yeah, that's a good call out, kind of hinting onto the whole like issue of attribution, right? And deciding like how effective your marketing spend is. This is where if you really want to understand that clearly and make decisions, would you say that unifying customer record is one way that you're going to understand that with a more of a 360 view?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And it's also true too that, like, all of the different systems, as I mentioned, have a lot of different pieces of information. And so on average, we've noticed that a brand has anywhere between 75 to 100 different pieces of customer data information for each customer that they have. And some of them are slightly different from each other, or they use different things. And so it's really, really hard to make that connection. So, we oftentimes think about business intelligence and your basic metrics and lifetime value off. And for this 360 view, if you have people in the audience that are lifecycle marketers that care about retention a lot, or customer experience, one of the things that we often find for brands is a bunch of like duplicate accounts representing one person, which means that brand has been sending this person like 10 emails every single email blast as opposed to one. So it can go from the basic financial metrics, the P&L of how you think about your company, to like the actual experience that those customers are getting, which could be an overwhelming of marketing material. Usually.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's definitely a good call out. And I think that you kind of hit on something that I see as a question or kind of an observation in the chat, which was that someone had read somewhere that there's more than 20 different methods for sign up, like emails, addresses, phone. And is that still the case? And I would say it's like, maybe it's even gotten worse. Yeah. There's so many different, like most apps or e-commerce websites have like 3 or 4 different ways that you can even log in with an email. So it really exploded even more.
And I think too that for a lot of brands, they're under the pressure to try and get conversions really quickly. So, at the end of their checkout, it'll be like, do you want to use Shop Pay or Amazon or whatever? And what actually that does is that it might lead to a faster conversion, which we're all happier about, but it actually splits the data up. And like, what's really crazy is that even though Shop Pay is owned by Shopify, in many cases that information is still disconnected. So if someone then goes and buys through the regular flow, you'll be registered as 2 different customers, even though all the information is the same, because ShopPay is a subsidiary of Shopify. So it's really basic stuff of why stuff can get disconnected.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's always funny to think about how most of these big companies, the things don't really talk to each other quite as much as you'd think. I think one thing that comes to mind is like, it really, to me, sounds like a problem that's really worth solving. And with AI is something that can be solved a lot cheaper. What size of company do you think it is worthwhile to start going after this sort of issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I usually think about it in like 2 or 3 dimensions. So basically, if your company is in the over 65 million annual rev range, you almost certainly have significant data quality issues that require addressing immediately. When you're smaller than that, the 2 main factors that I ask are like, one, is this a high frequency type business where you're offering lots of promotions and product sequences? Like, are you in cosmetics or something like that, where you're trying to win companies that way? In that case, because of the different loyalty strategies and rewards points and all that kind of stuff, you can start having high quality data quality issues at a much earlier stage than, like, say, a fashion brand or a CPG company. So that's one thing. And another thing too is just like, how popular did you guys blow up? How fast did your marketing list grow? Because one of the other things that we do on our end, and one of the products that we're really pushing now, is like reducing people's Klaviyo bill or reducing their MailChimp bill. So as you grow, you get popular, all of a sudden, your sales are growing year over year over year, and then your email lists are exploding, your SMS lists are exploding. And that includes junk, that includes duplicate accounts, that includes people who haven't engaged with anything that you've done in the last year and a half. And you're paying those companies a lot of money to maintain those sorts of lists. And so when we look at a whole unified view of your customer, we can then say, like, hey, by the way, here's all the junk. Here's all the people that are completely unengaged, like suppress those profiles and like save money on Klaviyo immediately. So that can even appeal to a brand that is in a smaller range if their like Klaviyo bill is really high. Like if you're paying a couple $1,000s a month for Klaviyo, we can probably help you reduce that by like 10 or 20%.
Yeah, so it's almost like if you invest some money into something like an AI data cleansing tool and unification, you can almost save money in the long run. Could you tell me, I'm going to drop a little bomb here. So like, Could you tell me about like some of the ways that this goes wrong when it's not solved with AI?
Oh, you mean if someone tries to do it themselves? Yeah. So okay. So we're as data engineers and machine learning people, like we've all been in this place where we try to do it ourselves. So one of the major problems of trying to solve this problem yourself is that you're either going to do it manually, which honestly a lot of people still do. Like I've talked to some people at some of the largest companies on the planet, and they're just like, we have interns who just like go through and clean up email lists all day, right? So it's a huge human effort on that part. Also, if you don't really take a careful approach, if you haven't had a lot of data go through your systems, then what happens is that a lot of teams that try and do this themselves spend a lot of time and resources that come up with like a really bad solution. So we were talking once to this insurance company back in our very early days. They had a team of 6 people on this problem. It was product manager, a couple engineers, all that kind of stuff. And then at the end of the day, when they wanted to reconcile their prospects, they're just like, everything didn't work. So we just fell back on birthday and phone number matching. And, you know, Zach and I talked to them about the scope of the problem, how many records it was, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, we would have solved that in 4 hours. So, you know, like it's just like, it's one of those things. It's one of those classic data issues where it's like, oh, like, no, we'll look for the same phone numbers and then we'll look for this. And then all of a sudden you're just like, wait, this is a group email address. This is like a phone number that a bunch of people share. And so you have all these false positives and false negatives. And it's really hard to see all those different edge cases. And then you're just like spending more and more resources to try and solve it. So yeah, it can be rough.
It's truly an example of, you know, we talk a lot about right now how AI would make our lives easier, and it's something that makes the process so much more cost effective. Like, again, going back to like, it's not really, there's not a lot of examples about that. Sometimes we're trying to apply AI to writing marketing copy or something like that, where you might see some marginal gains, but you might not. But in this case, it's like completely taking something away where most data scientists or engineers would be so happy. It's not like part of their job that they're worried about going away. It's the part that causes a lot of burden. And I think this is a pretty good segue, because we were talking about how that project can fail, a little bit broader about how data projects fail.
Yeah.
My hint for the moderators to pull up a slide too when they have a minute. But we can keep talking about it. But yeah, so like I think it's important to talk a bit about like this specific project is such a good example of one where it almost always fails. It's kind of a bummer to say, but it either fails or it's just so expensive out of scope. And so so this is something that InsightLime we talk about quite a lot, which is like most data strategy digital projects fail. Like, why is that? And what we just talked a lot about was like this first one, which is that like data isn't structured. But some of the other things you hinted at, which I'll let you speak to a bit more, are some of those other pieces of like the way you're approaching the problem might not necessarily be the most effective when you take cost and everything else into consideration.
Yeah, it's such an interesting problem. And I think, you know, as both of us have been data leaders in organizations, it's like we're oftentimes asked to do projects where we know right from the start that it's totally not worth it, right? Because there are things that are like much lower hanging fruit and value. And I think what was really interesting in our conversation here, and I would love to hear some of the examples that you guys have done at Insight, like more specifically for the audience, is like just understanding exactly what's going on with an organization and being like, hey, these 3 things we can do relatively quickly, relatively straightforward, and it will bring a lot of value. And that strategy initially can pay off so much more than just like doing something fancy, doing something that's AI led or something like that. So do you have like an example of one of those sorts of things that we can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the example really is what I see more effective. So, right, there's like kind of 2 different ways to approach. Sometimes it's kind of the analyst-led approach for determining what you're going to work on. So an analyst or an engineer or a data scientist says, hey, I think this is a problem worth solving, and advocates to the broader team. The way that we go about doing that is actually just what you described, which is instead we approach it as a data strategy project to start with. And we are considering and talking with both the data teams and C-level leadership, marketing teams, and understand like from the board of directors down, what are the initiatives that are most important? Like, where do they need to move the needle?
Right.
And then assess where they're at with their current performance. And with e-commerce sites, there's such a wealth of behavioral data that they have that we can assess, okay, well, for you, this business, their conversion rate is really strong, actually. So trying to incrementally lift conversion rate might not be something that's going to really make a big difference. And then on the other side of it, also looking at like, well, what are your data structures currently? What is your marketing tech stack? And what is this data quality thing? And, you know, a lot of times we're not going, you should be doing like from scratch, the project unifying customer records. But with something like Orita, it's like, that's such an easy low level solve that then makes a lot more other things more confident when we go in. But what we usually end up with is like a top 10 list. And
Yeah.
so we both strategic recommendations, like we think your team potentially should be restructured or something like that. And then also like specific projects that could be actioned on that are like low hanging fruit that are something that they could really easily turn around and implement without a lot of resources. So that's like one of the ways we approach it, is just to have this holistic view. And we love to put it on like a matrix and say, here's ones that are low effort and really high impact, and just kind of show those in a way where it makes it easy for the teams, all of the teams, to come together and agree on what they want to work on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, when you were talking, that reminded me of you know, I was talking to a couple brands, and this is where like a data strategy, like what you guys do, and this is, I'm sure this is a project you guys can do in your sleep, is you know, on a per customer level, should you try and push them to buy again, or just to increase that average order value, right? So it's like as a toy example, it's like, if this person buys from you 12 times a year, the chance of you making them buy 13 is like not high. But could you get them to spend $105 instead of $100 or $110? Like, maybe that's really worth doing it. And then there's the other customers who are like, their AOV is $30 and they purchase from you once a year. Can you get them to do that like again, right? But you can't push them to spend like $50 or something like that. There's like analytics, I think, are really, really powerful, and they're kind of they're straightforward things to do. You can just set up like a different set of marketing campaigns based on each of those sorts of segments, and that's like the sort of like simple project that can have a lot of, you know, high impact, and it doesn't involve a ton of AI. It doesn't involve like a ton of crazy stuff. It could just be like a really smart analyst with good data can like solve that sort of stuff, and you guys can easily do those sorts of things, you know.
Yeah. So, and what else I heard in there, kind of relating back to projects failing or succeeding, is that starting with that business question is one of the key pieces that that helps make that project successful. And so asking like, well, what is more impactful, or if we impact AOV for this group or for this group, and once you have that clean data, that's really like the key question that you want to go after first.
Right.
And you know, I think it makes me, you know, we're talking a lot, and obviously talking a lot about D2C e-commerce. And you know, for you specifically work with that group. You know, why does it matter? Well, like, why do you focus so much on e-commerce brands?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of different reasons why. And so one of the other things too is to bring up is that, and this is just to circle a little bit back on value too, is like also the time to success, you know, which is something that's super critical. Like, maybe this project is something that could bring you a lot of success, but it's going to take you a year to fully realize those sorts of value versus like a few weeks, a few days. And that's another reason, another plug for our service, is that we typically clean a company's data within a few business days. And so that like greatly, you know, increases the ROI, because it's like you get something clean that's really quickly. But to kind of bring it back to what we're talking about, the reason why we focus on D2C is because of a few reasons. One is that a lot of retail and a lot of D2C brands have a lot of different customer data sources, right? That they've also haven't necessarily built themselves. So, you know, if you're talking about something like Google or Twitter, Facebook, you know, those have teams, thousands of engineers, thousands of machine learning people, thousands of different analysts, where an average brand is like, has great people and they're like growth strategy, operations and stuff like that, but they don't necessarily have a really huge engineering team. And so they need as much help as they can get if they want to kind of leverage data in a really smart way, which is why there's lots and lots of tools for them. Another reason too is that like what the technical name for what we do is identity resolution or entity resolution. And what's really important there is just like a large number of transactions and volume and stuff like that. And people buy stuff all the time, really. And they tend to want their stuff. So they tend to not lie about who they are. They tend to, sometimes they trick, like they make an email address or something like that, but like they'll use their real address, they'll use their real name because they want their stuff delivered to them, which is not necessarily true for a lot of different types of things like Netflix accounts or something like that, right? But there is so many bets that retailers make based on their customers that are really, really expensive down the line. Huge campaigns, marketing campaigns, which products to make, which channels to invest in. All of these things can be $1 million+ bets. And they're trying to do that in as data-driven a way as possible, even if it's not that fancy. And so there's the need for them to have access to high-quality data, which is the number one reason why we did that. And then the last thing that I said is that we do this D2C specific identity resolution. And so we can find a lot of the different causes. And so there's a lot of promo abuse out there. There's a lot of drop shippers. And on the positive end, there's a lot of little social networks in people's data. We can find networks of like people gift giving and stuff like that. For one brand, we found a subset of customers of theirs who had an LTV that was 10x higher than everyone else, and on average bought for 5 or 6 different households, right? Because we basically build this big social network out of your data, and then we're like, okay, these are the people, these are the bots, these are the drop shippers, all these sorts of things, and then you can kind of see how all the different types of customers that you really have. Yeah.
That's really great. And I think you kind of, while you were saying that, answered the question in the chat, which was like, it doesn't take you that long to do this with AI compared to some of the integrations for data cleanup services because it's driven by machine learning, right?
Yeah, it's driven by machine learning. And Zach and I, because we've worked with brands and you've also worked with them too at all sorts of different stages, it's like, it's just not feasible that we can just make, and we do have an API that engineers can use, but it's like, if someone who's heading marketing about to launch their first $10 million campaign at the New York subways or something like that wants to figure out our promos being abused, all this kind of stuff happening. It's like they want to be able to sign in their data sources and start seeing clean data and then analyze the impact of those campaigns like a few days later, right? And so they don't want to like get on a call and then not really know what the pricing is up front and then like all this kind of stuff. And then like 6 months later, the clean data starts coming in, and then they still got to do everything that they need to do downstream with it, or you need to do downstream with it for them. And so just getting stuff faster. And in D2C, it's like people expect stuff fast. You can start a Shopify store in like 10 minutes. You should be able to have good data fast too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you started to hit on some of the projects, right? So it's like once you have that clean data, which makes it a lot easier. You can always try your best without it, but if it's something that's like a lower lift, like, and you've already got it clean, like some of the projects, like what are some of the projects that you can do? And I'll let you start with the marketing effectiveness, which we touched on a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's usually the one that we tell brands to do right off the bat. So like, if anyone's interested and they go to our website, they can look at our dashboard, or they can get on a call with us. Like we have this section down at the bottom, which is like, here are all your data sources, here are the duplicates in them, or here are the people that are missing. And so in that context, they can like download those lists and like upload them right away and like get immediate ROI. So for example, in Klaviyo, as I mentioned, or MailChimp or whatever, as you grow, you have this accumulation of junk. You have accumulation of junk, you have accumulation of people who are represented 4, 5, 6 times in your data. And then you can actually look at like the emails and whether they're open and whether they're clicked and whether they lead to purchases to figure out like people who just like don't respond to that channel at all. And so what we've done is that we basically look at that and then prioritize like every single customer in order. Here's someone who's, this is a scam bot. This is a duplicate account. This is someone who's never opened an email that you've ever sent them. And we rank every single email that's in your list. And then we can be like, okay, like this top 10 to 15% of completely unengaged profiles, like just get rid of them. And now your bill is 15 to 20% lower. So that's like a super, super fast version of it. And then on the other end of it, like we alluded to before, it's like you can also just do more specific segmentations, which is also usually a really quick lift. So like, let's say that you want to do a campaign that's based on lifetime value or based on a churn model or based on retention or something like that. So we have ways that we help brands do this. We have a little bit of modeling that we do ourselves. It's not really our wheelhouse, but it's used as a demonstration. but it allows brands to know more accurately, like, oh, this is a customer that's actually churning because I now know for a fact that this is their unified history and they haven't purchased with us in 6 months. Let's send them an email. So those are a lot of the things that brands do right away when they use them.
Yeah, those are really great examples, and that's something that we work on quite a bit. Is like, okay, now that we're confident, like that's the part that will take the longest, and it's the same thing where like, once we have that information and we're really confident that we have customer records that seem good and that we can unify on customer user ID or whatever it is that churn prediction. And then also, a little fancier is something that we really like to do called a cluster analysis, which is a broader analysis to identify those persona groups so that you can say, okay, well, we've been marketing to Joe Schmo from Ohio who looks like this, but when we actually break down who our top purchasers are and like their behaviors, we can actually see that what we have are something like you mentioned before. There's some sort of like really niche group that's gifting to each other. How can we nurture? How can we kind of foster more of that? Okay, and then we also have these other two core groups that are the biggest amount of revenue. So it's a lot more strategic way that can feed right into something like an activation email, but also can be broader, like making the messaging for those big subway campaigns or when you're starting to go into TV and things like that, to be really confident that you can message beyond just a traditional marketing persona. So that's one that people found really impactful.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's kind of a point that I often harp when I'm just talking about data in general with brands or with marketing agencies. It's like we're at this point where we don't have to deal with the average anymore. We don't have to deal with like one concept of a customer, one set of behaviors, and assume that that's going to fit everybody. I think that one of the best uses of data and a data strategy, and you've alluded to so many of them, is like really figuring out who your best customers are. And then maybe also figuring out who your worst customers are if they're like really costing you money, and then kind of finding more of your best customers and then restricting the sort of behaviors that encourage your worst customers, right? As opposed to just like focusing on like, oh, our AOV is $50 and X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, let's take a look at the people who spend $100 and who buy every few months and like really understand all those sorts of behaviors. And you talked about it and you guys do those sorts of projects really well. And then where we come in is just to make sure that like, that is that $100 customer because like you put all their transaction history in. So that I think is like one of the best, fastest things to do is like to really understand your best customers and then maybe your worst customers a little bit too, and not necessarily focus on just like the average.
Yeah. Data in aggregate is crap is one of the things I've heard. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat right now. But I was gonna wrap up by saying, so the like from start to finish, if you work with someone like Orita to do this more AI-driven data unification, it takes, are you going to give us an estimate of how long? And then I can give some estimates of like realistically, like these other projects too.
Yeah, so let's see. For most brands, we can clean and unify their data within 5 business working days. And yeah, that's typically, unless you're like a company that's been around for like 30 or 40 years or something like that, then it takes longer. But for most brands that we deal with who've been around for 5 to 10 years, that's around 5 business days, so a week.
Yeah, that's great. And then for something even the fancy, one of the fancier projects, right, like a cluster analysis, if the data is clean, that project can take less than a month, so only a few weeks. So really quickly, you can have some stuff to run with. And some of these smaller projects, like really looking at like marketing effectiveness and cutting some costs, like those also can take 5 business days or something like that. So it's really like a lot more attainable than some other projects just because of the efficiencies of like, which is the super exciting thing where I do believe in the hype of AI.
Yeah. That's great.
Which most of the time I don't, but this is really one where I believe in it.
Yeah, so. You and I are in the same thing. It's funny being in the machine learning world and then all of a sudden it's like literally 1 week to the next, everyone kind of views what you do very differently. And it's like, no, we're not like that. We're the good guys. We clean data. We're like the boring guys under the table. Like
Yeah, definitely. And some of these other projects might not be as sexy, but they're really the ones where then you can show the money. So I'm gonna hang on. Like anyone, if you have any questions, like literally just want us to answer something that you've been wondering about, like please let us know in the chat here. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up. We don't want to take too much of your time and wanted to keep this short and sweet. But what we'll do afterwards is actually send out a little bit more of a detailed deck and like Shay posted in the chat, like you are absolutely welcome to email us and ask other questions. There's no cost associated with that. Like we're just excited. Like I think it's just an opportunity where things have really sped up and changed. And at least for Insight Lime, we're super committed to that, reducing that number of amount of data projects that fail to almost zero. So that's something that we're really passionate about. And then we also have some contact information up here. So feel free to email us, take a screenshot of this, and then you'll also get a deck.
Yeah, and I would just like to thank everyone for joining and listening to us rattle on about data projects and stuff like that. And just to reiterate what MaryBeth said, it's a really exciting time for data. Obviously, as a society, everyone is very excited about AI, and as the kind of the old hats in the ring, we hope to kind of help people understand what's really feasible and what's also going to give you like the most effective ROI when you start doing more and more data strategies or become more of a data-driven organization. So looking forward to chatting to anyone who wants to take this conversation offline. And thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much, Daniel, for chatting with me too. It's always a lot of fun. So thanks everybody, and you'll have a follow-up pretty quick after this.
Bye guys.